My name is Dana Mitchell, and in the middle of a sun-drenched Sunday brunch at the Ivy in West Hollywood, I looked my younger sister in the eye and told her she was being evicted from the 3-bedroom Spanish colonial house in Silver Lake that I've been paying for since I was 24. Cheers and congratulations, I said, my voice as steady as it was when I coordinated supply chains for the 101st Airborne. You now have exactly 30 days to get out of the house I let you live in for free. I didn't yell, and I didn't let a single drop of my $18 blood orange mimosa spill onto the crisp white tablecloth. I simply watched as the color drained from my sister Chloe's face, her mouth hanging open in a silent gasp that made her look like a stranded fish. At 29, I am a logistics officer in the U.S. Army, a woman who deals in hard facts, cold numbers, and the brutal reality of chain of command, and I had just effectively court-martialed my own family over avocado toast and smoked salmon. But I'm getting ahead of myself because to understand how I became the villain of the family group chat, you have to understand the dynamic of the Mitchell family. For as long as I can remember, I have been the utility player, the one who worked 2 jobs while finishing my degree at West Point, the one who sent home 40% of my paycheck from every deployment to ensure my parents could keep their 2019 Lexus RX 350 in the driveway. Meanwhile, Chloe was the golden child, the aspiring influencer whose career consisted of taking photos of expensive lattes and complaining about the stress of her $5,000 a month lifestyle, a lifestyle that was entirely subsidized by my sweat and my absence. I had bought that Silver Lake property as an investment, a $1.2 million piece of real estate with a mortgage of $6,400 a month, including property taxes and insurance, and for 3 years, I had let Chloe stay there under the guise of her getting on her feet. The breaking point didn't come with a bang but with a notification on my phone. While I was stationed at Fort Campbell, living in a cramped apartment and driving a base model 2021 Toyota Tacoma with 60,000 miles on the odometer, Chloe had been hosting elaborate parties. I found out through a tagged post on Instagram that she had spent $12,000 of our parents' emergency savings, money I had provided for their medical insurance premiums, on a birthday bash for her new boyfriend, a failed DJ who drives a beat-up 2012 BMW 3 Series with a custom exhaust. As we sat at that brunch table, the humid California air thick with the scent of jasmine and expensive perfume, the injustice of it all finally hit me like a physical blow. I looked at my mother who was wearing a $200 silk scarf I'd bought her for Christmas and my father who was checking his gold-plated Apple Watch, and I realized they weren't just enabling her, they were weaponizing my success against me. The silence at the table was deafening, interrupted only by the distant sound of a 2024 Porsche 911 Carrera revving its engine on Robertson Boulevard. Chloe finally found her voice, her tone shrill and dripping with the practiced indignation of someone who has never been told no. You can't do this, Dana, she hissed, leaning over her half-eaten brioche French toast. We're family and family doesn't put each other on the street. I leaned back in my chair, the sunlight catching the sharp crease of my tailored linen blazer. Family is a circle of love, Chloe, not a circle of exploitation, I replied, my mind already calculating the logistics of the $450 filing fee for the formal eviction notice I had sitting in my Toomey briefcase. You've spent more on overpriced designer handbags from the Grove in the last 6 months than I've spent on myself in 3 years, and the bank doesn't accept family loyalty as a mortgage payment. The betrayal burned, a slow-rolling fire in my chest that outweighed any guilt I might have felt. I was the one who missed birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays to provide for them, and in return I was treated like a bottomless ATM with a rank and a serial number. This wasn't just about the house or the money, it was about the fundamental collapse of respect. As I signaled the waiter for the check, knowing full well I'd be the one paying the $340 bill despite the tension, I knew my life was about to change. I wasn't just the sister anymore. I was the landlord, the officer, and the one person who was finally going to hold the Mitchell family accountable for the debt they could never truly repay. My name is Dana Mitchell, and my life is a meticulously calibrated machine governed by a 0500 wake-up call, the crisp scent of starch on my pressed Army combat uniforms, and a relentless budget spreadsheet that tracks every single liter of fuel consumed by my 2021 magnetic gray Toyota Tacoma TRD off-road, which cost me exactly $42,000 after taxes and registration fees. The contrast between my existence and my 32-year-old sister Marissa's life could not be sharper if it were carved with a combat knife, because while I am measuring logistics and managing military personnel, Marissa lives entirely by what she calls vibes. She fancies herself a lifestyle influencer, curating a digital facade for 12,000 followers that I know for a fact were purchased in bulk packages from a click farm for $99 a set, and she shares this delusion with her husband Joel, a 34-year-old man whose only full-time occupation is freelance consulting for a series of shell companies and startups that exist nowhere except in the glossy brochures he prints at the local FedEx office. For nearly a decade I have been forced into the role of the reliable one, the daughter who graduated from West Point and immediately became the family's unofficial safety net, the one who quietly settles the $145 tabs at family dinners at places like the Cheesecake Factory while Marissa conveniently discovers she has forgotten her Saffiano leather Prada card holder in her other handbag. Watching her across the table is like watching a performance artist who has started to believe her own lies, as she adjusts the lighting on her iPhone 15 Pro Max to capture the perfect aesthetic of a life she cannot actually afford. I remember the specific sting of a dinner last November at a bistro in Hartford where the bill came to $212 because Joel insisted on ordering the premium Wagyu sliders and 3 rounds of artisanal IPAs, only for them both to go silent and look at their fingernails when the check arrived in its little black leather folder. I paid it as I always do because the alternative is watching my parents' faces crumble in embarrassment, but every swipe of my Chase Sapphire Reserve card feels like a small erosion of my own soul. Marissa's husband Joel likes to talk about market disruptions and venture capital while he sips coffee that costs $7 a cup, all while I am calculating the exact depreciation of my Tacoma and ensuring my 401k contributions are maximized to the federal limit. The injustice of our dynamic is a physical weight, a pressure in my chest that builds every time I see her posting photos from the Silver Lake house, my house, tagging it as her sanctuary while I am thousands of miles away sleeping on a standard-issue cot or in a cramped apartment that smells of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. I spent my 20s in the dirt, in the heat and in the silence of command, while she spent hers chasing trends and spending money that wasn't hers to spend. She treats my hard-earned stability as a natural resource she is entitled to strip mine, never pausing to ask how many 18-hour shifts or missed holidays it took to build the wall of security she hides behind. Even her wardrobe is a testament to this parasitic relationship, featuring a $600 wool coat from Aritzia that she begged me to buy her for her birthday 3 years ago, claiming it was an investment for her brand, yet she has never once offered to pay for a single grocery run or utility bill. Now, as I sit here in the quiet aftermath of my ultimatum, I realize that the golden child only shines because someone else is tirelessly polishing the brass, and I am finally putting down the cloth and walking away from the charade of Mitchell family unity. Reality is coming from Marissa and Joel, and unlike my logistics reports, there is no way to buffer the impact of the truth once the funding is cut off and the vibes finally run dry. The mask finally slipped exactly 6 months ago at precisely 02:14 in the morning when my iPhone 15 vibrated against the nightstand of my darkened bedroom at Fort Campbell, the harsh blue light illuminating the room as Marissa's contact photo appeared on the screen. When I answered, the sound on the other end was a jagged, hysterical sobbing that made my stomach drop because it wasn't just her usual dramatic flair. It was the sound of a woman whose carefully constructed house of cards had finally collapsed under the weight of reality. Between gasps for air, she wailed that they were being evicted from their $2,800 a month apartment in a trendy part of the city, claiming that the baby had been battling a persistent fever, that Joel had been downsized from his non-existent consulting gig, and that they were quite literally facing a night on the street with nowhere to go. My military training is designed to make me a problem solver, a logistical strategist who moves resources to where they are needed most, and against every instinct that told me this was a bottomless pit of need, I felt the familiar pull of family obligation. I made a decision that I would come to regret with every fiber of my being by opening the doors to my $315,000 investment condo in Denton, a property I had meticulously maintained as part of my long-term retirement strategy. The deal I presented to them was incredibly simple and documented in a clear email. They had exactly 90 days to stay there rent-free, provided they paid the monthly utility bills which averaged around $110 and kept the place in pristine condition. I didn't just give them the keys. I spent my only weekend off in 3 months driving my $42,000 Toyota Tacoma back and forth, logging 14 grueling hours of manual labor as I hauled their overpriced West Elm furniture and boxes of Marissa's designer clothes into the condo. My back ached and my hands were blistered by Sunday evening, but as I looked at my niece sleeping in a portable crib in the second bedroom, I told myself that this was what family did, that this was the moment Marissa and Joel would finally realize the value of a stable roof and a sister who never stopped showing up. The reality of their move-in felt like a military operation, one where I was the only soldier doing the heavy lifting while Joel stood by his 2012 BMW 3 Series scrolling through his phone, claiming he had a bad back from the stress of their financial ruin. I remember the smell of the cleaning supplies I bought for them, a $48 haul of Method and Mrs. Meyer's products from Target, as I scrubbed the floors one last time before handing over the spare set of keys. I told them specifically that the condo was my pride and joy, a piece of real estate I had saved for since my first deployment, and that I expected them to treat it with the respect it deserved. Marissa hugged me then, her face puffy and tear-streaked, promising that they would be back on their feet within the month and that they would never forget what I had done for them. As I drove back toward the base on Sunday night, the hum of the Tacoma's tires on the asphalt was the only sound in the cabin, and for a fleeting moment, I actually believed that my generosity might be the catalyst for her change. I didn't know then that I wasn't saving her. I was just providing a more comfortable venue for her next betrayal, and the $110 utility bill was the very first thing she would choose to ignore the moment I was back behind the safety of the base gates. Moving them in was the hardest physical labor I had done all year, but it was nothing compared to the emotional weight of realizing that to Marissa, my investment property wasn't a lifeline, it was just another thing she felt she was entitled to consume for free. By the time the fourth month rolled around, the temporary guests I had rescued from the brink of homelessness had undergone a psychological metamorphosis into entitled owners of my $315,000 investment property. I didn't need a private investigator to tell me what was happening because Marissa was broadcasting her colonizing efforts to her 12,000 bot followers every single day through Instagram stories that made my blood boil. I would sit in my office at the base, staring at my phone screen as she performed elaborate yoga flows on my private mahogany-stained patio, the golden hour light hitting her precisely positioned Lululemon gear while she typed out captions about how she had finally manifested this peaceful sanctuary for her soul. While she was busy manifesting tranquility in a space I had spent 5 years of my life saving for, she was simultaneously ignoring my increasingly urgent text messages regarding the $85 overdue water bill and the mounting late fees from the city utility department. The transformation of my property was becoming a physical manifestation of her disrespect, a realization that hit me with the force of a tidal wave when I decided to conduct an unannounced drive-by at 2200 hours on a Tuesday night. As my 2021 Toyota Tacoma rounded the corner of the quiet Denton Street, I didn't see the dark, respectful home of a family struggling to get back on their feet, but rather a glowing beacon of audacity that looked more like a frat house. A collapsible beer pong table was set up smack in the middle of the manicured front lawn I had spent $300 a month maintaining, surrounded by empty cans of premium craft seltzer and the distinctive smell of cheap cigars. The most jarring detail, however, was the sight of a brand new $600 custom-made oversized doormat sitting at the entrance, emblazoned with the words "The Sandersons" in elegant, gold-leaf cursive script. It was a permanent statement of residency, an expensive piece of decor purchased with money they supposedly didn't have, and it signaled to the entire neighborhood that they weren't just passing through. They weren't scouring Zillow for affordable rentals or updating their resumes to find stable income. They were redecorating my retirement asset to suit their aesthetic preferences as if I were merely a distant, faceless benefactor rather than their own sister. I sat in the idling truck, the dashboard lights reflecting off my sunglasses, watching Joel laugh as he tossed a ping-pong ball across the table while my niece was presumably sleeping somewhere inside that chaos. The utility bills I had asked them to cover, the meager $110 a month, remained unpaid, yet they clearly had the capital to invest in custom home accessories and midweek parties. It became chillingly clear that Marissa and Joel didn't view my condo as a lifeline, but as a prize they had successfully swindled out of the family's resident overachiever. They had mistaken my professional discipline for weakness and my generosity for a permanent subsidy, assuming that I would never have the heart to disrupt their curated lifestyle. As I shifted the Tacoma back into drive and pulled away from the curb, the engine's low growl matched the simmering intensity of my resolve. The manifestation was over, and the logistics of a forced extraction were already beginning to form in my mind, because if they wanted to play house in a sanctuary they didn't own, They were about to learn exactly how a United States Army logistics officer handles a breach of contract and a betrayal of blood. The breaking point of my patience did not arrive with the stack of unpaid $85 water bills or the late notices from the electric company, but rather during a suffocatingly curated brunch my 58-year-old mother, Diane, insisted on hosting as a Circle of Love event at a high-end bistro where the prix-fixe menu started at $65 per person. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the artificial cheer of 22 invited guests, mostly family friends and Marissa's local influencer acquaintances who spent more time adjusting their ring lights than engaging in actual conversation. Marissa stood up in her $400 silk wrap dress, holding a $15 glass of chilled Prosecco aloft while her phone sat propped against a floral centerpiece, broadcasting a live stream to her digital audience of bots and strangers. She didn't look at me with gratitude or even the basic recognition of a sister who had saved her from the street, but instead she leveled a condescending smirk in my direction that chilled me to my core. "I want to toast to my support staff," she announced to the room and the camera, her voice dripping with a rehearsed, melodic sweetness that made my stomach turn as she continued by saying, "These are the people who handle the boring stuff, the logistical clutter, so that Joel and I can remain focused on building our dream and manifesting our sanctuary." The room erupted into polite, mindless applause, and I felt the blood rush to my face as I realized that in her filtered world, I was not a sister or a benefactor, but merely the logistics girl, a background character whose only purpose was to facilitate her delusions. I was the unpaid landlord who spent my weekends doing manual labor so she could have an aesthetic backdrop for her morning yoga, and to her my military rank and the $315,000 asset I provided were just boring details she was entitled to ignore. My mother beamed at her as if she had just delivered a Nobel Prize acceptance speech, while my father adjusted his tie and avoided my gaze, clearly unwilling to disrupt the fragile harmony of the Mitchell family facade. The sheer audacity of being publicly labeled as support staff while I was the one footing the bill for her entire existence was the final logistical error I was willing to tolerate. I sat there in my stiff linen blazer, my hands clenched beneath the tablecloth, calculating the exact cost of the brunch, the unpaid utilities, and the thousands of dollars in lost rental income that she treated as her birthright. Every clink of her glass felt like a personal insult to the years I spent in the dirt and the heat of deployment, earning the money that she now used to buy custom doormats and overpriced sparkling wine. She wasn't just a squatter anymore. She was a predator who had rebranded her parasitism as a lifestyle choice, and she truly believed that I was too bound by family loyalty to ever strike back. As the waiter brought out plates of eggs Benedict topped with truffle hollandaise, I looked at Marissa's smug, glowing face through the lens of her smartphone and realized that the circle of love she was celebrating was actually a noose she had tied around my neck. The realization was cold and sharp, a tactical shift in my mind that moved me from sister to adversary in a single heartbeat. She wanted to treat me like the support staff who handled the boring details, so I decided right then, amidst the clinking of silverware and the smell of expensive perfume, that my next logistical detail would be her formal eviction and the total shutdown of her manifested sanctuary. The toast was over, the live stream was recorded, and the Mitchell family was about to find out exactly what happens when the support staff decides to resign and take the entire infrastructure with them. I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice, and I certainly didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing the tears of rage that were threatening to blur my vision as I watched her preen for her digital audience. I simply waited for her to finish her rehearsed, condescending toast, and the moment she paused to take a delicate sip of her $15 Prosecco, I reached into the inner pocket of my $240 Alpha Industries bomber jacket and pulled out the folded, notarized 30-day notice to quit. With the steady hand of a woman who has navigated active combat zones and complex supply chains, I stepped directly into the frame of her iPhone 15 Pro Max, ensuring that every single one of her 150 live viewers had a front-row seat to the document that would dismantle her carefully curated lie. "Cheers, Marissa," I said, my voice echoing with a cold, professional clarity that cut through the chatter of the bistro. "And since you're so fond of manifesting, you can spend the next 30 days manifesting a new roof over your head because you are being evicted from my Denton property for non-payment of utilities and breach of our verbal contract." The silence that followed was so heavy and suffocating that it felt like the oxygen had been sucked right out of the room, leaving only the distant sound of a 2024 Tesla Model S humming past the restaurant on the street outside. My mother let out a sharp, horrified gasp, her hand flying to her throat as she whispered my name with a mix of shock and betrayal that felt like a physical blow to my ribs. "Dana, how could you do this to your own sister at a family event?" she cried out, but I didn't even turn to look at her because I was too focused on Marissa, whose face was twitching in a grotesque mask of humiliation as the comments on her live stream began to scroll by at a lightning-fast pace. Joel nearly tripped over their toddler who was playing with a dropped piece of cantaloupe on the floor, his mouth agape as he realized that the gravy train had finally reached its final station and the support staff was officially off the clock. I didn't stay for the inevitable theatrics, the screaming matches, or the manipulative pleas for mercy that I knew would follow once the initial shock wore off and the reality of their situation set in. I simply straightened the collar of my jacket, smoothed out the fabric of my tailored black trousers, and walked out of the bistro with my head held high, the glass doors clicking shut behind me with a finality that felt like the closing of a heavy vault. The California sun was blindingly bright as I stepped onto the sidewalk, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could actually breathe without the weight of their entitlement pressing down on my chest. I had a mission now, a tactical extraction of the parasites who had been draining my resources and my self-respect, and I knew exactly what my first move had to be. I climbed into the driver's seat of my $42,000 Toyota Tacoma, the interior smelling faintly of the expensive leather conditioner I used to maintain the upholstery, and dialed the number for my closest friend Becca, a sharp-witted JAG officer who specialized in real estate law and military-civilian disputes. As the engine roared to life with a satisfying rumble, I told her I needed a meeting immediately to discuss the legal logistics of a high-stakes eviction and the potential for a civil suit regarding the 4 months of unpaid utility bills and the property damage I suspected was hidden beneath Marissa's aesthetic rugs. My name is Dana Mitchell, and while they might have seen me as a background character in their filtered life, they were about to find out that the logistics girl is the one who controls the movement of every single asset, and their time in my sanctuary had just been permanently liquidated. I pulled away from the curb, leaving the Mitchell family drama in my rearview mirror, focused entirely on the legal battle ahead and the sweet, cold reality of finally standing my ground against the people who shared my blood but not my values. The digital counterattack was as predictable as it was pathetic, and within 45 minutes of my departure from the bistro, my phone began to vibrate incessantly with notifications from friends and distant cousins who were watching Marissa's latest social media meltdown in real time. She had posted a tearful high-definition selfie, her eyes artificially reddened by a filter and a stray lock of hair perfectly out of place, accompanied by a caption that read, "My sister is evicting a baby in the middle of a housing crisis," followed by a series of broken heart emojis that were clearly designed to harvest maximum sympathy from her 12,000 followers. I didn't engage with the comments, and I didn't send a single defensive text to the family group chat, which was currently exploding with my mother's frantic messages about family unity and the sacred bond of sisterhood. Instead, I sat at the mahogany desk in my home office, flipped open my 15-inch MacBook Pro, and clicked on an encrypted folder titled Project Eviction that I had been meticulously populating for the past 3 months with the cold, hard data that Marissa seemed to believe didn't exist in her manifested world. The folder was a logistical masterpiece of betrayal and financial negligence, containing 54 high-resolution screenshots of her Instagram stories where she explicitly claimed ownership of my $315,000 condo, tagging it as her sanctuary and her hard-earned investment to lure in brand deals. I scrolled through the digital paper trail of her entitlement, pausing on the scan receipts for the $1,240 in unpaid water, electricity, and gas bills that I had covered from my own savings just to prevent the city from shutting off the life support of my own property. The evidence didn't stop at unpaid utilities as I opened a formal PDF report from the Denton Homeowners Association detailing 3 separate noise complaints regarding an unauthorized $1,200 lilac tan French bulldog named Coco that Marissa had purchased while claiming she couldn't afford $50 for the trash collection fee. According to the HOA logs, the dog had been left on the balcony for up to 6 hours a day, barking at the 2024 Mercedes-Benz SUVs passing by, resulting in $400 fines that had been quietly billed to my account and which Marissa had conveniently failed to mention during our Sunday brunches. I looked at the total sum of their parasitic existence: the 4 months of lost rental income at $2,200 a month, the utility arrears, the HOA fines, and the potential deep cleaning costs, and the number on my spreadsheet blinked back at me with a staggering total of $11,640. Every byte of data in that folder was a nail in the coffin of our relationship, a tactical map that Becca and I would use to ensure that when the 30 days were up, there would be no legal loophole for them to crawl through. I could hear the hum of the central air conditioning in my own home, a cooling system that cost me $300 a month to maintain, and I felt a grim satisfaction knowing that I was no longer the support staff for a woman who treated my life's work like a stage prop for her digital fiction. Marissa thought she was winning the war of public opinion with a tearful selfie and a few hundred likes, but she was playing a game of checkers while I was moving heavy artillery into position for a full-scale legal siege. As I backed up the folder to my secure cloud storage and prepared to send the entire file to Becca's JAG office email, I realized that the baby she was using as a shield deserved a mother who understood the value of $1 and the sanctity of a promise, rather than a lifestyle influencer who couldn't even manage a water bill. The logistics of their departure were now set in stone, and no amount of filtered tears or manifested vibes was going to stop the momentum of the truth I had captured in 54 screenshots and $1,200 worth of unpaid receipts. The moment I officially listed the Denton condo for a competitive $410,000, Marissa shifted her strategy from pathetic victimhood to active, calculated sabotage. I received a frantic call from my real estate agent, Sarah, who informed me that during a high-stakes walkthrough with a serious cash buyer, Marissa had pulled the inspector aside to whisper a series of blatant lies about the property. She had looked that professional in the eye and claimed the walls were bleeding toxic black mold behind the drywall, a move specifically designed to tank a deal that would have netted me a significant return on my $315,000 investment. I didn't waste a second, igniting the engine of my 2021 Toyota Tacoma and navigating the heavy afternoon traffic at a clipped, military pace until I pulled up to the curb of my own property. When I used my master key to enter, the air inside didn't smell like the expensive Jo Malone candles Marissa usually showcased on her live streams. Instead, it reeked of cheap, acrid chemicals and desperation. I walked into the guest room and felt a surge of cold fury that surpassed anything I had felt at the brunch, because they had decided to freshen up the space by slapping a coat of hideous, streaky beige paint over the professional eggshell finish I had paid a contractor $2,000 to apply. It wasn't a renovation. It was amateur vandalism performed by people who didn't even have the decency to use painter's tape or drop cloths to protect the infrastructure. I looked down and saw a constellation of $12 hardware store paint drips splattered across my $4,000 Brazilian cherry hardwood floors, the beige spots hardening like tiny scars on the surface of my hard-earned asset. I didn't scream, and I didn't give Marissa the satisfaction of a confrontation while she stood in the kitchen clutching a green juice and pretending she hadn't just committed a crime against my property. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my iPhone 15 Pro Max, and began a systematic high-resolution photographic documentation of every single drop of paint, every streak of uneven color, and every scuff mark they had inflicted on the baseboards. I spent 45 minutes capturing the evidence with the clinical precision of a crime scene investigator, ensuring the lighting was perfect so my attorney, Becca, could see exactly how much it would cost to restore the room to its original condition. I calculated the professional cleaning fees, the cost of sanding and refinishing the hardwood, and the labor for a professional paint crew, adding another $3,500 to the mounting debt Marissa and Joel owed me. While Marissa tried to explain that she was just trying to make the place more marketable for my sake, I ignored her completely, my thumb flying across the screen as I attached the photos to a direct email to Becca's JAG office account. This wasn't a family disagreement anymore. It was a documented case of property damage and tortious interference with a business expectancy, and I was going to ensure that every cent of the repair cost was deducted from whatever meager security deposit they thought they were entitled to. I stood in the center of the ruined guest room, the beige walls looking like a visual representation of Marissa's blurred moral compass, and I felt a profound sense of clarity. She had tried to destroy the value of my primary financial asset because she couldn't stand the idea of me regaining control, but all she had managed to do was provide me with the physical evidence I needed to pursue a full civil judgment against her and Joel. The logistics of their exit were becoming more expensive by the hour, and as I walked back to my truck, I realized that the circle of love had been replaced by a circle of litigation that was rapidly closing in on them. They were no longer just squatters. They were vandals in designer clothes, and I was the officer who was going to make sure they paid for every single drop of paint they had spilled on my future. I pulled away from the curb, my mind already calculating the timeline for the professional restoration crew I would hire the moment the sheriff escorted them out of the building. On exactly the 15th day of the 30-day notice period, I woke up at 0500 with a clarity that only comes from a mission objective finally being cleared for execution. I drove my 2021 Toyota Tacoma to the local branch of First National Bank, the morning sun glinting off the hood as I prepared to systematically dismantle the life support system of Marissa's manifested sanctuary. I sat in the high-backed leather chair across from a bank representative and instructed them to immediately terminate the autopay authorizations for the $210 high-speed fiber internet and the $165 monthly electricity bill that I had been subsidizing since they moved in. As the banker clicked through the screens, I felt the phantom weight of those recurring charges lifting off my shoulders, knowing that the era of warm, lavender-scented baths and midnight Netflix marathons on my dime was officially over. I wasn't just cutting a check. I was severing the umbilical cord of entitlement that had kept Marissa and Joel afloat while I drowned in their logistical wreckage. By 14:30 that afternoon, the digital fallout began, and my phone transformed into a vibrating brick of familial resentment as it exploded with 14 missed calls from my mother, Diane. When I finally checked my notifications, I found a 3-minute voicemail that was a verified masterpiece of emotional manipulation and generational guilt. Her voice was trembling with a rehearsed fragility as she asked me how I could act like such a stranger to my own flesh and blood, before pivoting to a nostalgic weaponization of our childhood. What happened to the sweet girl who used to sit on the porch for hours and braid Marissa's hair? She sobbed into the recording, conveniently forgetting that the girl she was describing had grown up to lead soldiers and manage millions of dollars in military hardware while her sister learned how to exploit that kindness. I listened to the message twice while sitting in my quiet kitchen, the only sound being the hum of my own refrigerator, and I realized that the girl who braided hair had died a long time ago in the heat of a deployment, or perhaps during the third time she had to pay for a dinner Marissa forgot to fund. That girl realized that having the same DNA doesn't give someone a lifetime license to bleed you dry under the guise of family loyalty. I looked at the call log, 14 attempts to shame me into submission, and I didn't feel the familiar pang of daughterly duty. I felt the cold, hard resolve of a logistics officer who had identified a leak in the system and plugged it permanently. My mother's version of a circle of love was actually a one-way street where I did the driving and everyone else enjoyed the scenery from the back seat. As the sun began to set over the base, casting long purple shadows across the asphalt, I knew that Marissa was likely sitting in a darkening condo, staring at a router that was no longer blinking green and a refrigerator that was slowly losing its chill. The darkness falling over the Denton property wasn't an act of cruelty. It was a consequence of her own choices, a physical manifestation of the reality she had spent months trying to ignore. I deleted the voicemail without responding, the silence in my house feeling more like a victory than a void. The Mitchell family was learning a hard lesson in the economics of respect, and I was finally comfortable being the villain in a story where the hero was expected to be a doormat. If they wanted a sanctuary, they would have to find one they could afford to power themselves, because the girl who braided hair had officially resigned, and the woman who took her place was busy calculating the next phase of the eviction. The air inside my mother's living room was thick with the scent of expensive vanilla candles and the palpable vibrating tension of a tactical ambush that I had seen coming from the moment I pulled my 2021 Toyota Tacoma into her pristine driveway. I had agreed to this family-only meeting under the false pretense of a peaceful resolution, but as soon as I stepped over the threshold, the staging became painfully obvious, revealing a desperate tableau designed to guilt me into professional surrender. Joel was pacing the length of the Persian rug like a caged tiger in a cheap suit, his restless energy clashing with the curated image of Marissa, who was curled in a fetal position on the ivory sofa wearing a $90 Lululemon Align set in a shade of soft lavender meant to broadcast fragility and victimhood. My mother hovered in the background with a tray of untouched tea, her eyes darting between us as if she could stitch the gaping wounds of our relationship back together with nothing but a few choice words about sisterly devotion. The silence was finally broken by Joel, who stopped his pacing and cleared his throat with a practiced corporate gravitas that felt entirely unearned given his history of failed ventures and phantom consulting gigs. "We have a proposal for a purchase on terms agreement, Dana," he announced, his voice steady but lacking any real weight as he looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "And we want to take over the title of the Denton condo with a zero down payment structure while we build equity for the baby's future." It was the ultimate audacity, A demand for a $315,000 asset in exchange for absolutely nothing but their continued presence. And the sheer technical ignorance of the request made the professional soldier in me recoil. I didn't scream and I didn't throw the lukewarm tea. I simply let out a sharp, genuine laugh that echoed off the high ceilings and sent a visible tremor through Marissa's supposedly fragile frame. "You want to build equity, Joel?" I asked, my voice cutting through the room with the precision of a drill sergeant addressing a particularly hopeless recruit. "But the reality is that you can't even manage to build a coherent resume or maintain a consistent stream of income to pay an $85 water bill." I looked at the three of them, the enabler, the parasite, and the pretender, and realized that they had spent so much time living in Marissa's filtered digital world that they had forgotten how the actual economy functions. "You have exactly 7 days left on your 30-day notice," I continued, my gaze locking onto Marissa's reddened eyes as she finally sat up to glare at me with a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "There will be no purchase agreement, no equity building, and no further subsidies from my military salary to fund your lifestyle influencer aesthetic or your husband's imaginary career path." I stood up, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored blazer, feeling the cold weight of the keys in my pocket and the digital security of the evidence folder I had already shared with my attorney. "The manifestation is over, Marissa, and the sanctuary is closed, so I suggest you stop recording your tearful selfies and start packing that $600 custom doormat and your $1,200 French bulldog before the sheriff arrives at 0800 next Tuesday morning." My mother began to wail about the sanctity of the family circle, but I walked toward the door without looking back, the sound of Joel's stuttering protests fading into the background of my own resolve. I had spent years being the support staff for their delusions, but the logistics of this family dynamic had finally reached a point of total system failure, and I was the only one willing to perform the necessary surgery to save my own future. As I stepped back out into the cool evening air and climbed into my truck, the engine's roar was a reminder of the life I had built with discipline and grit, a life that would no longer be a resource for people who mistook my silence for a blank check. The final blow was delivered not in a courtroom or a hushed living room, but in the digital arena where Marissa had built her throne of lies, and it arrived the moment she had the audacity to launch a GoFundMe campaign titled Family in Crisis with a goal of $15,000 for emergency housing and medical expenses. I sat in the driver's seat of my 2021 magnetic gray Toyota Tacoma, the engine idling as I watched the donations start to trickle in from unsuspecting strangers who believed her narrative of a heartless military sister casting a baby onto the streets. My thumb hovered over the screen of my iPhone 15 Pro Max, and for the first time in 6 months, I broke the silence I had maintained with disciplined, soldierly restraint by posting a single devastating link to a public Google Drive folder directly into the top of her comments section. I didn't type a manifesto or a plea for understanding. I simply labeled the link the receipts and watched as the traffic to that folder spiked, exposing the calculated reality of her parasitic existence to her 12,000 bot followers and the donors she was actively defrauding. The folder was a chronological execution of her reputation, beginning with the original signed 90-day occupancy agreement that clearly stated the terms of their stay and moving into the high-resolution evidence of the $3,500 in DIY paint damage they had inflicted on my guest room. I included the scan receipts and bank statements showing that I had subsidized their lifestyle to the tune of exactly $11,450 over a mere 6-month period, covering everything from the $165 electricity bills to the $400 HOA fines for their unauthorized $1,200 French bulldog. Within minutes, the tide of public opinion shifted with the violent speed of a flash flood, as the comments section transformed from a chorus of sympathy into a firing squad of accountability from people who realized they were being scammed by a woman in a $90 Lululemon set. Marissa's manifested sanctuary didn't just crumble. It evaporated under the heat of objective truth, and I watched in real time as the circle of love she had weaponized against me turned into a frantic circle of deleted comments, blocked accounts, and a deactivated GoFundMe page that was flagged for fraudulent claims. The notification pings on my phone finally went silent as the Mitchell family group chat was deleted in a fit of rage by my mother, who couldn't bear to see the data that proved her golden child was a financial predator. I looked out the windshield at the Denton skyline, the sunset casting a deep orange glow over the city, and I felt a profound sense of tactical completion that no amount of family loyalty could ever replace. The logistics of the betrayal were finally balanced. The debt was public and the support staff had officially exited the building, leaving Marissa and Joel to face the cold, unlit reality of a condo they no longer had the right to inhabit. My name is Dana Mitchell, and as I shifted the Tacoma into gear and pulled away from the curb, I realized that blood might be thicker than water, but it isn't thicker than a notarized contract or the cold, hard numbers of a bank statement. Family isn't the people who share your DNA while they pick your pockets. Family is the people who respect the work you put into building your life, and I was finally ready to find a new circle that didn't require me to pay for the privilege of being insulted. The mission was over, the asset was being recovered, and for the first time in years I was driving toward a future that was entirely my own. The final accounting of the Mitchell family saga concluded not with a tearful reconciliation, but with a wire transfer that signaled my total liberation from the parasitic cycle I had been trapped in for nearly a decade. After the sheriff's department oversaw the removal of Marissa, Joel, and their overpriced French bulldog at exactly 0800 on that final Tuesday, I spent $3,000 on a professional restoration crew to strip the hideous, streaky beige paint from the guest room and refinish the scuffed Brazilian cherry hardwoods to their original luster. The investment paid off with the cold, mathematical precision I have always relied on, because the Denton condo didn't just sell. It sparked a bidding war that resulted in a final sale price of $425,000, which was a staggering $10,000 over my aggressive asking price. I stood in the empty hallway one last time, the air smelling of lemon wax and fresh start instead of entitlement and cheap Prosecco, and I felt the weight of the $315,000 mortgage vanish from my balance sheet along with the emotional debt of my sister's manifestation. I took my share of the profit, a significant six-figure sum after closing costs and the repayment of my initial investment, and I used it to secure a down payment on a secluded mid-century modern lake house 3 hours north, tucked away in a zip code where none of my family members have the gas money or the social standing to travel. On the day I signed the final papers for the new property, I sat in the driver's seat of my 2021 Toyota Tacoma, the cabin quiet and the GPS set to a destination they will never find, and I opened my Venmo app one last time. I sent Marissa a final itemized request for exactly $2,400, a conservative calculation of the physical damages to the flooring and the cost of the professional paint restoration, and I pressed the send button with a steady finger. I didn't wait for the inevitable notification to hit her phone, and I didn't stay to read the hysterical rebuttal I knew would follow. I blocked her account, her phone number, and her social media profiles before the digital signal even had time to bounce off a cell tower. My new living room is a sanctuary of genuine tranquility, illuminated by floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over the slate-gray water of the lake rather than the suburban sprawl of Denton or the performative brunches of West Hollywood. The walls are painted a perfect professional shade of Benjamin Moore classic gray, a color that reflects the soft morning light and requires no filters to look beautiful, and I have made it a personal rule that there isn't a single circle of love sign or manifested quote allowed within the perimeter of my property. I spent $2,800 on a high-end leather armchair and a minimalist sound system that plays nothing but the wind in the pines and the occasional low hum of a distant boat engine, a far cry from the shrill accusations of a family that mistook my logistical competence for an endless supply of patience. At 29, I have learned that the most important supply chain in life is the one that protects your own peace of mind, and that sometimes, the only way to save the structure is to cut out the rot at the foundation. My name is Dana Mitchell, and I am no longer the support staff, the logistics girl, or the silent benefactor of people who share my blood but not my soul. I am a woman with a clean slate, a paid-off career, and a home where the only vibes I have to manage are my own. As the sun sets over the lake, casting long golden shadows across my perfectly maintained deck, I realize that family isn't a circle you are born into. It is the group of people who earn a place at your table by respecting the boundaries you have spent your life building. The mission is officially complete, the ledger is balanced, and for the first time in my adult life, the silence in my home is the most expensive thing I own, and it was worth every single cent I spent to get it.